What is your name
My name is Ed Scott.
and your age?
I'm 64.
Okay, and your occupation right now?
Well, I'm a bowyer,
Okay,
bow maker.
Oh, okay. What inspired you to make bows?
Well, I've always liked bows, and when I was a kid growing up down in South Central Florida, we got most of our food out of the woods, and a lot of times we couldn't afford ammunition for 22s or BB guns, but we could make a bow and maybe kill a young rabbit or some other kind of like a quail or something like that, and sometimes we would shoot fish.
What inspired you, Ed, to make, or what age did you start?
When I was about 9 years old, I was able to make my first bow. Some of my older brothers were making bows, and I had an uncle who was born back in the 1880s, and he stayed with us for a while, and he was very good at making bows, and he taught me a little bit back then. Of course, the bows that we made then were very simple, something that a kid would do.
And why do you make bows, Ed?
Well, I make bows because I really love the sport of archery, and I make bows because it gives me a way to occupy my mind and my hands, and I make bows because they're never boring. A person that makes, say, fiberglass laminated bows, I couldn't do that because that's very, very boring. They have certain dimensions that they cut everything to, and then they put it in a press and glue it all together with the fiberglass on it. And it's just repetition stuff, craftsman work. What I do is more artisan work. In other words, each piece of wood is different, and you have to kind of let the wood tell you what to do. You can learn ahead of time what it takes to make a particular style of bow that you want to make, and you can start out with a piece of wood that will be conducive to that. But there's many times I've started out with a piece of wood intending to make a certain style of bow, but before I got the bow done, it was a different style because the wood had defects or things in it that caused me to change what I was doing.
Great. Where do you make bows, Ed?
Right here in my shop, Grants, New Mexico, is where I make all of these bows. I have made them up in South Dakota on the Cheyenne River Reservation up there. Went up last summer, me and this Zuni that I taught to make bows, and a guy from Missouri that I taught to make bows, and then a couple of bowyers from Pennsylvania and Ohio. We met up there, and we're trying to teach the Lakota bow making skills, and I was particularly teaching them how to make the horse bows that their ancestors used for killing buffalo.
How do you make a bow?
You ask a question that takes several weeks to answer. But actually, the way you accomplish anything is intelligence guided by experience. That's the way you do anything. That's the short answer.
And what are the stages in bow making?
Well, you have to first find the right sort of tree, or acquire the stave, the long piece of wood that it would take to make a bow that's suitable for that, and then there's different ways of doing it. One way is you let the stave cure for a couple of years, and then you make just an ordinary, what is called a self bow. No backing, or if there's any backing on it, it's added to just a self bow. And then there's the way that I do most of mine is I cut trees that are suitable, split out the staves, and while they still have the moisture in it, I will use heat and pressure to shape that like I want it, and then apply sinew to it and let that cure for several months, and then make the bow.
And that's the stages, right?
Well, the stages of making it is shape the stave, apply the sinew, wait for it to cure, then begin the tillering process. I usually, sometimes if I'm waiting, I figure maybe 6 months for this sinew to cure out properly. After about 2 months, I think that the wood and the sinew's cured enough, I can begin the tillering processes, which means that you're trying to get both limbs to bend properly without breaking. And then it's a matter of waiting until the sinew's cured out and do final tillering, and then you make a string and you seal up the bow so that you don't have a rapid exchange of moisture as humidity changes.
And how long does it take to make a single bow?
Well, a kid's self bow I can make in about 5 hours. Ordinary self bow, like a long Eastern woodland Indian style bow, takes about 8 hours. And sinew back bows that I make usually run from 30 to 60 man hours, spread over about a 6 or 7 month period. The horn bows take something like 120 man hours spread over a year and a half.
Wow. And what are the different parts of the bow?
The different parts of a bow is the grip, and then these are called arrow rest here. This is one way that I've modified this bow from its original California style. They did not have arrow rest, but I put these in here. And I modified it to have rawhide on the back for doing my artwork on instead of just clay and hide glue. This is the upper limb. This is the lower limb. This is the belly of the bow. That faces the belly of the archer. Belly. And this is the back of the bow, and it faces toward the target. Of course, this is the string, and the bow now is called unbraced or unstrung. And in order to shoot the bow, we have to brace it or string it. In order to do that, what I do is I use what's called a push-pull method. I put this down against my instep, not on the floor, and then I push down with my left hand here, and I'm pulling with my right, and I slip the string up over the knot right down. Now the bow is braced. It's ready to shoot. Right here, this is, of course, the string. These are called string silencers. These are beaver fur. And this is a knock point, and that's a piece of thread that's been tied and glued here so that you can knock the arrow at the same place every time.
Could you hold it up for us to see a strung bow, what it looks like?
Now this happens to be made from one seed juniper wood up off of Mount Taylor, and sinew from a white-tailed deer, and then rawhide from a white-tailed deer. The string could be made from sinew, and I do make some sinew strings, but this is made from Browning B50 Dacron 15 strands. This string will hold more than 600 pounds. And this bow right here is 56 pounds at a 26-inch draw. Because of its shortness, it can only be drawn to 26 inches safely. It would probably not break if it was drawn farther, but it wouldn't be good for it. But at this weight and this draw length, this is more than adequate to kill a grizzly bear, elk, moose, buffalo.
And I like the artwork in the front, right over here, and the front side of the bow, and the other side.
The back of the bow.
Yeah, or the back of the bow. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is a California pattern. The Shasta, Modoc, Yorick Indians of Northern California made bows for juniper or yew wood with sinew on them, and then they would take usually white clay and hide glue, white clay powder and hide glue mixed together, and fill in the crevices in the sinew to make a smooth surface. And then they'd put patterns like this on there for decoration. And also that's good camouflage. If a person's hunting, it's a broken up pattern. And that's all that's necessary in hunting herbivores, because they don't see colors.
Great.
Okay.
And what are the different types of bows?
Different types of bows.
You told me this is the California style bow?
Yeah. This is California style. Then this one is it's called a flat bow.
I can take that right if you want.
Okay, I'll just lay it over there. This is called a flat bow. This is made from Osage orange wood. It has no backing on it. It does have a little artwork on it. In fact, down at Myers Springs in the Big Bend country of Texas, on a sandstone bluff, this picture appears down there, written with hematite. They rub hematite rocks and mix it with saliva or water and finger paint, and it stays for centuries. You can see this was, when was it made? It's interesting that this Zia sign appears down there, but it had some other little figures inside it that you can't make out.
Mm-hmm.
This is called a flat bow, but there's other styles called flat bows too. I wanted to get up for a moment.
Okay.
This is also a flat bow. Eastern woodland Indian style, been modified to have an arrow rest. They didn't have an arrow rest. And sometimes and this one does not bend in the handle. Some of theirs would bend in the handle. This also has no sinew on it. It's made from Osage orange wood and I've just recently put Western Diamondback snake skins on it. And so this is the kind of bow that when North Americans, when the Anglos and Spanish and so forth, the French first began to come into the eastern shores of North America, this is the type bows that they found with most of the native people there. Was called a flat bow. And then this is a horse bow, plain style horse bow. They didn't always have a horsehair tuft on them, but often they did. It has quite a bit of reflex in it, which means it's going to shoot very hard and fast. When you string it up, this is called a 5 curve. So you've got one curve here, curve here, curve there, curve here, and curve there, 5 curve. And this is a fairly long for a horse bow. It's 53 inches. They're American Indian plain style horse bows range from 40 inches up to 56 inches. So this falls within that. But they would ride on horseback up alongside a buffalo, and they would point it to the sky. They maybe have 2 arrows held here and one knocked there, and point it up to the sky and bring it down. And when it got down and lined up just behind the short ribs on the buffalo, kind of angling forward, they'd let it go, and that arrow would disappear right up into the vitals and puncture the diaphragm. Buffalo has both of his lungs in one sac, and if you puncture that, he can't breathe. So he runs on for a ways, and his oxygen gives out, and he goes down. So the tribesman, when he got that good shot on one, he could just ride on in the herd and stick another one. And then if he looked back, he'd see that other one back there going down, you know. So they'd be strung out for 4 or 5 miles where they'd run a herd and kill their winter supply of meat, hides, sinew, and so forth. So that's a horse bow. And I make another style here. This is juniper. This one, you notice how this bow reflexes off the handle and then has reflex tips. Well, this is what I call a bush bow. It's short for ambush. It deflexes off the handle and then has reflex tips. Now a bow of this style of the same draw weight won't shoot as hard and fast as the reflexed. This is deflex reflex. It won't shoot as hard and fast as the reflex, but it's easier to be accurate with because it has a softer release. And so this is a short bow that has the shooting characteristics of a long bow.
Oh, wow.
And then there's horn bows. The Nez-Perce, Arapaho, some of the western Lakota, Ute made bows out of sheep horns, antlers from elk, buffalo ribs, and very, very few of buffalo horn. They had to piece that together. But horn is very, very good in compression, but not too strong in tensile strength. But when you make a combination of sinew and horn, then you make a bow that's just out of this world. This bow is only 41 inches knock to knock, but because of the wonderful compressive characteristics of the horn and the wonderful elasticity of the sinew, you make a bow that can be drawn to 25 inches and shoot at a tremendous speed. And some of the people who were running buffalo had bows like this. And this is the kind of bow that they would sometimes shoot all the way through a cow buffalo and kill the calf running on the other side, with one arrow.
Wow.
This is look how it's reflexed. Now when we string it, this is very difficult to string. This is the time when I do actually put it under my foot there. So now this bow has a tremendous amount of stored energy already, and that's what's happening when you draw a bow and release the arrow. The energy that's stored in bracing the bow and then in drawing the bow is all imparted to that arrow. And that's what gives the arrow its speed, energy to drive in and to go a long ways and hit a target if you're just shooting for fun, or to really drive in and get into the vitals of an animal if you're hunting for meat. I started out talking about the simplest style of bow. Well, the simplest style is you just cut a sapling and bend it and put a string on it, and you have a bow that you can actually hunt with. But it's not a very good bow, and when it dries out, it'll probably break. And then you go to still a very simple style of bow. Now this happens to be a near replica of a Seminole bow, which is in the American Museum of Natural History in New York. But this is simply a piece of cypress wood split out from a cypress tree, and it just gradually tapered it in. It also bends in the handle. This is the thickest part of it. Mm-hmm. But it's a bow. And actually this bow shoots pretty good. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly adequate for them killing those little white-tailed deers and wild hog that's down there. By the way, wild hogs have been in Florida for almost 500 years. DeSoto brought a herd of 300 with him when he come through there. And hogs are always wanting to sneak off and go have their young out in the palmetto somewhere and then get lost from the herd. But the Spanish conquistadors brought their meat with them. They weren't that good at hunters. They really took a beating. The Creeks and the Cherokees and the different ones would shoot at them with bows, and they used river cane shafts and stone points. Well, these conquistadors were wearing mail, but mail is links of steel, you know, and the stone point would shatter, and the cane shaft would split and drive in there and give them awful wounds, and they would get all kind of infections and everything. But that's other than this is about as simple a bow as you can get, other than just cutting a sapling, put a string on it, and yet it works very well. Okay. Now, this one is made from gemsbok horn instead of sheep horn. Two gemsbok, or South African oryx, two horns bound together here in the center. And this is as far as I know, this is the only one in the world like it. And it's in the process of being made. It's not up to its full strength yet. The sinew's only been on here for about 3 months, but it's already a really good bow, and it's been shot. It's only 52 inches from nock to nock, and yet it can be drawn all the way to 28-inch draw.
Ah.
Amazing little bow. And I have never heard of anyone making bows like this before. Now, the other hand, if we're talking about different styles of bows, there is the Asiatic style horn bows. See if I can find what. Where the North American Indians who made horn bows, they simply used horn and sinew, and occasionally they'd use some handmade copper rivets to hold the two horns together from the sheep horn. But the Asiatics have been building horn bows for far more than 5,000 years, and they have a wood core in theirs. Now this is what was sliced off of those gemsbok horns and is left over. And this, for making an Asiatic style bow, this can be boiled and compressed between two boards, clamped and flattened out, and then glued onto the belly of this bow, sinew on the back, the stave, and make an Asiatic style bow. And of course they often attached here, they attached to seas, and sometimes theirs would come all the way back around, look like a crab laying there. And those are the fastest, farthest shooting bows that man has ever made. Of course, we're not even talking about these newfangled contraption that they call compound bows, which aren't really bows at all. Did I tell you that I've never shot one of those?
Yeah, you were telling us.
I did touch one once. Okay, and so that's pretty well covers the different style of bows. In the fiberglass laminated bows, you have recurves. Here's a bow made from mesquite wood, sinew, and white-tailed deer rawhide. And it's not a recurve, but it shoots like a recurve. It's reflexed off the handle and then reflex tips. So with all of that reflex in there, by the time you string it up, you've got a lot of stored energy. So that's and sometimes I do a little artwork on the bows. Sometimes I feel like it's appropriate to put animals on bows. So I've got a polar bear and a buffalo on here. Or you could call that another kind of bear. But I hope it looks enough like a bear. I'm not really good at drawing animals. I can't draw people. Also, sometimes like a knothole, I make turquoise inlay. It's interesting, a lot of the Native American tribes felt like turquoise offered them protection That's why they like turquoise jewelry and so forth. I found that very interesting. I also think that snakeskin just really gives a nice look to a bow, and I do that quite often. Put snakeskins on it. It started out mainly with people requesting it, and then I got to liking it after people requested it.
Can we take a look at that other one again, Ed?
This one?
Yeah, look at the craftsmanship on that one.
It's this particular buffalo right here appears at as a rock art painting at Paint Rock, Texas, along the Concho River. There's a half-mile of sandstone bluff there, covered with all kinds of rock paintings, and they even have some of them where at the winter solstice, sunlight will come down and make a light dagger pointing to something on the 21st of December, you know. So it was more than just casual painting.
It's like a calendar.
Something like that. And then this is what I call a raven medicine man. Kind of like. And then once again, I've put a California pattern on the back of this.
Okay.
You just do it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's the way you're supposed to shoot a bow. Is
Yeah.
just do it. You know, not all this sights. Some of these newfangled contraptions have got laser sights on
They
them.
look silly.
There's no beauty in them that I can see. Look like a piece of military equipment. You know, all function, no beauty.
I hate watching it in the Olympics now.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Well,
look like a
they're not even bows. They're machines.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, at least the fiberglass laminated guys, you know, I mean, they only have maybe 60 years of tradition, but they are actually bows. My bows, you know, we got 10,000 years of tradition.
What regions are all the bows from?
Well, I pretty much keep my bow making, as far as regions, I pretty much keep my bow making to the North American continent, but occasionally I will make a bow of the style from ancient Northern Europe. You notice that on my bows, I have a narrow, stiff tip that doesn't bend, and I borrowed that from what they call the Home Guard bow. Home Guard, Sweden. They found in a cave there some bows that carbon date to about 8,000 years old, and the ancient Northern Europeans were doing that. Also, the Andaman Islanders do that, and the Lakota Sioux do that. And it's a very effective thing. So unless I'm making something that's just a replica, a near replica of something, I go ahead and make a narrow, stiff tip on it, and it causes the arrows to fly faster.
What types of materials do you use on your bows?
I use wood, sinew, rawhide, shark skin, fish skin, and Dacron string, and of course glue. The old way of putting on sinew, and many people who sinew bows today still do that. The old way was use hide glue. Hide glue is made up of bits of rawhide and stray bits of sinew that's boiled and then allowed to turn into a gel, and you moisten it and heat it up, and it makes a very good glue. I don't use hide glue anymore because it's messy to use. I use commercial wood glue that's weatherproof or waterproof. This one company makes one that's weatherproof and the other one that's waterproof, and I use both of those glues. And and then, you know, horsehair for tufts, beaver fur for silencers, or coyote hair, or whatever for silencers.
And that's all the materials, right?
Yes.
And what kind of, how can you tell if by looking at a piece of wood that it would make a good bow?
Well, you're looking for straight grain. A lot of people make a mistake. They think if they see a board that's sliced and they can see a lot of different patterns on it that has a beautiful grain, that's what they say. Well, the grain that's not the grain. That's the different annual rings showing when the board was sliced across the annual. The grain is where, if you start to split a piece of firewood, where it splits, when you hit it and it splits, that's the grain. Trees are made up of strings of fiber. They grow, add some to them each year in annual rings, but they're strings of fiber. And so you want a tree that is going to have these strings of fiber running pretty straight, so that you don't, and without a lot of knots and so forth in it. Knots still work, but it's a lot more difficult. So you look for that, and then, you know, while you can make a bow out of any kind of wood, it's much better to use good bow woods. We're looking for a wood that the natural characteristics are that it would have good compressive strength and good elasticity, good tensile strength. Like in North America, the highest tensile strength wood that we have is hickory. But Osage orange is considered the best bow wood in the world for making unbacked bows, because it is excellent in tensile strength, elasticity, and it's excellent in compressive strength. And then it has the additional thing that it's very malleable. When you heat it up, you can form it into a certain position and then let it cool down, and it'll stay in that position. But there's other woods. Like I use juniper and mesquite. Both of these woods are very, very good in compression, but they're not very elastic. But with sinew, now you have the elasticity that you want, because when a bow bends, the back of the bow is under tension. The belly is under compression. So if the back of this piece of wood, if the back here is under tension and the belly's under compression, guess what? There's a place in here where it's neutral. It is neither under tension nor compression. It's bent, but it's not under tension. It's not under compression, it's neutral. Well, what you do when you put enough sinew on, if you get the right amount of sinew onto the back of a piece of wood, you make the neutral plane about equal to where the back of the wood is. And there it becomes virtually impossible to break. You can crush down, if you bend it too far, you can crush down the fibers in the belly, in the wood, and ruin the bow, but to actually break becomes virtually impossible. Not impossible. If it gets too dry, you know, down to 3 or 4% moisture in sinew, it will break. But sinew is magic stuff. Sinew has 10 times the elasticity of wood, and weight for weight, it's stronger than steel
Amazing.
in tensile strength.
And what's the price range of one of your bows?
I make little kids' bows for as little as $65, and sheephorn bows go for like $3,000. But usually guys spend between $600 and $850 for a good hunting bow.
Explain again, what is sinew?
Sinew is tendons. Your Achilles tendon is sinew. In your back you have sinew. Let me get up for just a minute here, and I'll show you. All animals have sinew. And some people say, well, now the sinew from the buffalo is best, and the sinew from the white-tailed deer is best, or sinew, you know, from elk is best. That's all nonsense. Sinew is collagen in a string. Mm-hmm. And this right here, about about 3 weeks ago, we went javelina hunting, and I was butchering one of the javelina, and I sliced out some backstrap sinew from the javelina. This would be shredded up and can be used. This is leg sinew from the front leg of an elk. I have lots of friends around town. They kill elk and stuff like that. They'll bring me the legs and the skins or whatever to use. And this is tendons. And later on, I'll make a quick demonstration of how we pound on this and strip it out in long strings. This is the tendons from front leg of an elk, running from like its knee down to its ankle.
Okay. And then what were you gonna say?
And in a little while, I will make a quick demonstration of how we shred this up into long strings and use it to glue onto the back of staves in order to make sinew reinforced bows.
Okay. You can do that now if you want to.
Okay. This is sinew from the front leg of an elk. It's been dried, and it just lasts on and on and on. Now, in order to get it shredded up so that I can hydrate it with water and then saturate it with glue so it can be glued onto the back of a bow, I'm going to pound on it, and this outer membrane will come off. And then I'll be able to shred this up. See, the outer membrane comes off. And then this will be just pure white sinew. Doesn't need to be cleaned or anything. It'll be perfectly clean. I do that by on this rounded surface, light taps, like so. Mike Stockland told me that when they were shooting dances with the wolves, they ordered 400 arrows. He made 400 arrows, and they had, of course, a rubber blunt point on them so they could actually shoot the buffalo and not hurt anything. And he said that after a while they called him up and said, "We want 400 more arrows." He said, "I made 400 for you. What did you do with them?" He said, "Oh, they're all been shot. They're all been trampled by the buffalo." You got it. Rip it apart. I use this vise. Not all that strong. Then, when you get it come apart like that, you take it with your fingers, like so. Pull it apart. This is still a little bit too much there. Pull it apart. Pull it apart. Get it down into threads about big as a pencil lead. And you just do that for hours until you've got enough to go on the back of a bow.
Can you show us like how it is like that?
They're shredded up, ready to use. And I usually take about per bow, probably about 4 ounces of dry processed sinew in order to get the right amount. It depends on the wood and how strong we're going to be making the bow, how wide the bow is, how long it is, and so forth. But generally around 3 to 4 ounces of dry processed sinew for each bow. That's all we need to do on that.
Okay.
But it's just repetition. Usually when I start with a stave, of course I start with a tree and I split out the stave using hammer and wedges. Then I get it straightened out like I want it and I begin to shape it into making a bow. Now this is making a long bow, flat bow for a man down in Georgia.
And I've worked this one end down to one annual ring there to get nice and smooth. I had some defects in the few annual rings here, but I got down below them and got this. And then I've heated this in and bent it so they'll have reflex at its tips. I heated the center of it and clamped it down and let it cool in order to give it reflex from the handle. Now I'm going to shape this other end up. It's pretty close to shape for side to side. I look down at here. I know that my arrow is going to rest right in here, so I'm looking down and I want it to come out just right. I'm going to take the hatchet and take a little bit off of this side. This, by the way, is an old 100-and-something-year-old Hewer's hatchet. It's a miniature broadaxe. It's been sharpened to where you can cut straight instead of having to gouge it in each time. You can cut straight. You have to hew the line. I don't know if you're familiar with that expression, hew the line, but that when a person wouldn't do his part, wouldn't continue to work like he's supposed to, they say, well, he won't hew the line, or he can't hew the line. Well, that is an old broadaxe expression from hewing the lines for hewing out logs for building log buildings. And so I've about got this shaped side to side here. And my handle section is here. I'm going to start in, I want to leave about 4 inches. I always put in a mark for the arrow rest first, and then I build everything around that, because that's the important part. Where that arrow is going to be flying from is what we're depending on. I'm going to start here. Undoubtedly, there can be a lot of this repetitive stuff here that you can edit out. Won't have to take up the time. But I have to take up this time to get to the next part. Okay, now what we're doing here on this end, I've brought down to 1 annual ring, but you can see the different annual rings here. I'm leaving a little bit thicker in the handle here. One reason is I need the thickness to make the handle, and another reason is I want to be able to round over the back of the handle. And that's all right to change where you're not following the fibers of the wood if it's not going to be bending. And it's not going to be bending. It's going to be bending from here to here, from here to here. And so I can build my handle up like that, and it will still work just fine because it's not bending. Now I want to find me an annual ring here that I can go down to. It might look like to you that I'm just simply cutting, but that's not the case. You'll notice right here, let me show you. You see that looks like honeycomb there? That is the early growth wood. That's what the wood that grows in late part of April and May and March. And it's all honeycomb. It comes on with a quick spurt of growth. And then later on, in the latter part of May, June, July, and August, the late growth wood, the real growth takes place. And then toward the end of August, the tree quits growing and shuts down for the winter. But that wood that grew in late May, June, July, and August, that's the really strong wood. The wood that grew real quick in the early spring is weak wood. And so that's what causes the annual rings in this particular type of wood. And so what we want to do is get where that same honeycomb appearance appears all the way down here. And it doesn't matter too much down here, this is going to be unbending, but for all this section that's going to work here, we want a perfect back on the bow where that all of the fibers of the wood are just lined up with each other and none of them nicked or cut or anything like that. Because if you have a little nick or cut in the back of the bow, that gives a place for the bow breaking devil to get his place to get his fingernails in and break your bow.
Oh, freaking devil.
I'm carefully working down to that. When I see that honeycomb, I know I'm down there. I hardly ever measure anything. God gave us eyes and fingers. This is a lot of different ways to heat this up. Sometimes if it's cold, I'll use the stove and put it across the stove to heat it up, or you could heat it over a campfire bed of coals or whatever. This happens to be a paint stripping heat gun, goes up to 1,000 degrees and blows the hot air, so it works good for me. So that's what I use most of the time. That in my stove. I got to get that up to around 300 degrees or so, and then it'll bend, and then when it cools down, it'll just stay right like that. maybe back up just a little bit. Where other kinds of wood, like yew wood's really hard to change. You can, to shape it up is very difficult, but it does shape up. Juniper's another one that's very difficult to shape up. But then hickory and ash and mesquite and osage, they all shape very well, especially when they're still green, still full of moisture. But osage is about the only one you can really shape when it's not full of moisture. If it's got 10% moisture in it, you're good to go.
And again, you got his words clear enough with the sound. Good.
So, and how do you find a real arborist? I've got some trees that I need to take care of, but it seems like everybody I talk to, they could just walk in and go, oh yeah, we're going to top the tree, and they seem to be worker bees and really don't know how to treat trees.
National Arborist Association. Where do you live?
In Albuquerque.
In Albuquerque. Now, so my son lives in Kansas City. And he's come down, when I used to work in Albuquerque, he's come down to help me sometimes. But finding a good arborist is difficult. Most of them out there are butchers.
Yeah.
And actually, Texas A&M had a professor teaching how to butcher trees, and I was amazed.
For what purpose? To show people how to do it quick and make more money?
No, he thought that was right. Didn't have good sense. But topping's about the worst thing you can ever do to a tree. You can head them back. Now, it's a different thing.
Head them back meaning stop them from getting taller?
No. Okay, you have a branch going up in the top of the tree.
Right.
Okay? Here's
Great.
Okay, that's hot enough and clamped down enough. It'll come out with just a little more bend, than the other end. And this is going to be the lower limb, and so that's what we want. We want the lower limb always needs to be just a little bit stronger than the upper limb. And so that needs to set for an hour or so, and then if you're still here, we can unclamp it and you can see the effects of it. I'm going to take this and set it outside now, out of our way. Well, my son, who's an arborist in Canyon City, Colorado, when we went on our javelina hunt recently, he brought me a cherry log. One of his jobs involved removing a nice sweet cherry tree, and it had a log that I was able, because of the way the tree was growing, I was able to get one stave out of it. There's a tree about 8 inches in diameter, but you get one bow out of it because the rest of the wood was not shaped right and so forth. This wasn't shaped exactly right, but while it was still nice and green, full of moisture, I took it and shaped this up and then clamped it down on my form here. Now we have a stave deflexed off the handle, reflexed tips. When I get this all sinewed up and everything and let it dry, this will make a real nice bow. And from the length of it, it's 55 inches long. It would be able to be drawn to 29 inches without any stack, without finger pinch, and have a nice soft release like a long bow. And yet it's just a short bow, easy to maneuver around in a blind or a tree stand or in the brush when a person's hunting. Okay, we've got one more thing to do. Well, two more things. We need to turn this stave into a bow. Not a bow till you get a string on it. Up until then, it's just a stave. When you get a string on it, it's now a bow, and then you start entillering your bow. Now I'm going to be working right here. Some bowyers think the deeper the shavings are in the shop, the better bowyers there are, but I never did understand that myself. I keep mine burned up in my little stove for this. Keep it out from underfoot.
Trying to get behind the camera.
I hope I don't embarrass myself, because sometimes after all the hours of work and everything else, when you start making a bow, it breaks. But we can edit that out.
And keeping moments like that in is precious.
This is a piece of juniper sapwood from a juniper tree, and actually I sinewed this up to take up to the South Dakota to the Cheyenne River Reservation, and I had 20 of different staves, and we didn't use this one. So now I'm going to use it, and it's very, very dry, and I'm going to have to be very careful to get it done without it breaking. But I think because it's soft wood, I think without taking too long, we can make a bow. And so first thing I want to do is I want to see how it feels. It's bending some. Being the kind of wood it is and as narrow as it is, I don't want to make too strong a bow with this. Probably around 30 something pounds at a 23-inch draw, which was typical.
Can you show us again the bending? Yes.
Now I'm going by feel of how much it's bending. If you were a student here, I'd have you check it and see how it felt to you, and then. So that means that I've got to remove some wood off the belly because it's stronger than I want to bend very far right now. So start out by rounding these corners off. Constantly look at the thickness. Here was a variation in the wood here. I got sinew laid down in that. This is a place where you have to be careful, or there'll be a place that it might break. This is going to be unbending tip from here out, so we're not going to worry about it right now. We're just going to work on the part that's bending. And I'm looking at this with a practiced eye, trying to remove the wood in an even fashion where taking into consideration the taper this way, how much it needs to taper as far as thickness goes. Let me say this. If a person aspires to be a bowyer, they have to have a natural sense, a good natural sense of ratio and proportion. It can't be taught. It's a sense of rightness, and it doesn't matter how much you try to teach it to a person. If they're not born with it, if they haven't developed it in their younger days, they're not going to develop that natural sense of rightness. A person can be a bowyer by taking all kind of measurements and repeating the same thing after time, but they'll never be a good bowyer for self bows and sinew reinforced self bows unless they have a good natural sense of ratio and proportion. Doesn't mean that you did well in school and math or anything like that. It just simply means if you have that good sense of what's right, what fits. I've had numerous students here, and some of them, for instance, Ernie Mackle is a Zuni. In fact, he's the president of the school board over at Zuni. He is a really good bowyer. I started teaching him about 3 years ago, and he's developed into a really good bowyer. In fact, he went with me up to South Dakota last year to help to teach the Lakota. Some of those that we were teaching had a good aptitude. Some of them didn't. Some of them were just there for a free bow. Didn't really have that much interest. Practically anyone with good woodworking skills can carve out something that looks like a bow.
Okay.
But what we're doing now, this tillering, this is the difference between a bowyer and a woodworker. What we do now, and I've taken off some more wood, we gradually see how this is bending. We don't want to hear a loud crack or anything like that. I see the upper limb's bending somewhat more than the lower limb. That's what we're going to want in the end, but right now I need to work on the lower limb a bit more. But we're getting almost to the point where we can put a string on this. Before the Native Americans had access to rasp and stuff like that, they had to use sharp pieces of rock, rough rock, and all that kind of thing in order to get their bow down carefully to where they could tailor it. on my horse bows, I put what I call a Lakota style knock. Well, it is a Lakota style knock. Just knock it from one side on the upper limb and then knock both sides on the lower limb. Knocking back in here because this peg out here is going to be for the horsehair tuft on it. The reason for this style of knock, I'm not sure exactly why, but I can see how a warrior riding through the prairie with his bow unstrung, if he come up on game, he's hunting game for his family, the quicker he can get the bow strung up and ready to shoot, the better off he is. Or if he's attacked by enemies, the quicker he can get his bow strung up. And with only one knock here, he doesn't have to worry about, did I get it in both knocks? Is it going to hold? Or once it slides into that single knock, it's in there, it's going to stay. Both of these are called tillering sticks. This is one for just using free and open. It's got notches cut down here. And this is a tillering string. This is an extra long string that you can use to get the bow to bend with without having to bend it far enough to get it all the way to being strung up. And then you can back off and look and see how you're doing. So with these highly reflexed bows like this, that stick doesn't work very good, but this one with the vise and notches down here works very well. It's called a tillering string. As I said, it's longer. It's an extra long string. Okay, so
Very nice shot.
what you do is you sit here and you hold your breath. Then I look and see how I spent it. And I look for spots that I might need to take off a little bit more than I would the rest of it. Make some marks. Now, by pulling down on that, I don't know what the bow draw weight would be right now, but I know that it's pretty strong. It's stronger than I want for this particular piece of wood and sinew. So, if this limb was bending about like it should, I want to take off the proper amount of wood but keeping in mind that ratio and proportion, you see, because I've got a certain amount of taper this way, and I need the right amount of taper for as thickness goes to match that, to keep it bending properly. If you're using homogeneous materials, like a lot of different kinds of strips of wood glued together with fiberglass on each side of it, you can know exactly what you need to do, and you can cut everything to proper dimensions, and you know how it's going to bend and everything. But in making self bows or sinew reinforced self bows, you just have to go a little bit at a time. And as I was saying, this is the tillering process is the difference between a guy that can work wood and a guy that can make bows. This is where the artistry of it comes in. The tillering process is the difference between a person that knows how to work wood and a bowyer, a person that makes bows. This is where the artistry comes in, that sense of rightness, sense of ratio and proportion, getting the limbs to bend properly without breaking. Right now I'm going to take some wood off of the upper limb in an even fashion, because it's bending nicely, but it's just not bending quite enough in relationship to the lower limb. This process up to this point of tillering is pretty fast, but it gets very, very slow. I mean, to actually tiller this bow out to ready to shoot bow would probably take me like 2 hours of very careful work, because I'll be bending it further and further, and I don't think we really need to do that, you know. You take off wood, and then you have to work it so that it can take effect. Otherwise, you take off wood, and you don't see any movement, and then all of a sudden it moves too much. But if you take off a little wood and work it. Okay, now it's bending just about right for a horse bow. Bending a little bit more in the upper limb than it is in the lower limb. It's a bow now. It could be shot. It does need some final touching on the touch up on the tiller, and these tips need to be narrowed down, horsehair tuft put on it, the back smoothed, and you know, artwork and so forth. But it's a bow that can be shot right at this moment. It's actually a little stronger at this point than I want it to be, but in the final tillering it'll be coming down in weight as I take more wood off the belly. Okay, this is string maker's wax, or some people call it bowstring wax. This is some I made myself. It's 1 part pinon sap, 5 parts beeswax melted together. And this is B50 Dacron bowstring twine. And I like this bronze color because it gives a string that looks like a sinew string, but now it's a very, very safe string. You don't have to worry about the string breaking, and that may be breaking the bow or hurting somebody or whatever. So. And I've got this jig set up here. You don't have to have a jig. You can just make these bundles extra long and put it on and cut off the excess. But I've worked out a jig here that fits it. So we've got a bow length of 50 inches, so I'll put that in there. And I'll start. I'm going to make 3 identical bundles of this twine here of 5 strands each. then they will be put together to make a bowstring of 15 strands, which will hold at least 650 pounds. And the rule is, if your string is twice the draw weight of your bow, you're safe. So I like it 3, 4, 5 times the draw weight of the bow, and then I know it's safe, and it fits the arrows good too. Now I'm waxing this heavily. Turn it around, wrap it around my finger. Wax it heavily, put it aside. And I'm going to do the same thing twice more. So there's no need of filming. What I'm doing here is reverse twist. This is just exactly the way you would make a Flemish twist string, and yet what we're making here is a Scott twist, which is improved Flemish twist, or superior to a Flemish twist.
Does anybody else in your family make bows, Ed?
Yeah, I have a brother that lives in Arkansas that makes some pretty good bows. Of course, not as good as mine. He doesn't make them for sale. He sold 2 or 3 of them, but mostly he just makes them for his own pleasure and to give to people. My son knows how to make bows, but he's busy with other things, and he's very meticulous, so it takes a lot of time for him to make them. I'm very meticulous. I've just made enough of them that doesn't. Well, when I spend 50 or 60 hours on one, I guess it takes me a lot of time to make them too.
Mm-hmm.
The reason this is superior to a Flemish twist bowstring is that instead of simply twisting these three together, I'm going to braid or plait 3 here, and so it can't untwist on you. Flemish twist strings, if they get taken off the bow, laid around, they can untwist and come apart. Mine can't. And
see the string again, real quick, Ed? The string here.
That's the loop there. I'm going to put it up here. I'm going to
What did you do before you made bows?
I was an arborist, tree surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
I spent about 12 years doing mission work. We spent some time over in Africa doing evangelistic work, and then we went back over with a couple of bulldozers and built some dams, teaching people how to grow food using irrigation. But mainly, I did, most of my life, I did tree work. I always worked with wood, one way or the other. I twist this 10 or 12 times. And with the friction, my hand melting that wax binds it all together here. And then this is purely cosmetic here. trim these tag ends off a little bit. Whack it down there.
Do you shoot every bow you sell?
Yes. Some of them are heavy enough weight that I can't draw them very far, but I shoot them.
How long do your bows last?
Well, usually the self bows, I warranty them for 1 year, provided they're taken care of properly. But the sinew back bows, I warranty them for my lifetime, breakage under normal usage if they're taken care of properly. I happen to have my hands on one of my bows that had been out there 6 years and had been owned by 4 or 5 different people, and then was sold on eBay, and the guy bought it and wanted me to put snakeskin on it, and he sent it back to me, and it was just as good a shape as it was when I sold it, 6 years before. It was a sinew-backed Osage. There we go.
What's the history of bow making? Do you know any of that?
Well, when the Anasazi were here, they had brought with them sinew-backed hunting bows. And some of their bows were very similar to the Eskimo bows, where the Eskimos use a raised cord of sinew on the back of their bows. They use things like caribou antler or, stray pieces of driftwood or whatever, put together their bows, and then put a cord of sinew over the back of it raised up. And some of theirs were delicate enough that they had little ivory adjusting tools so they could tighten up the cord or loosen it depending on what the weather was like and so forth. In the Bible, things that were written over 5,000 years ago, the bows are mentioned over 5,000 years ago. The Egyptians in 3000 BC were making very good sinew-backed bows. Now there's another part of the
bow making process is called serving, and all that is just wrapping a protective string around it to protect your string. And I don't see any reason for us to go through that. So, as I say, this bow is going to need some final tillering and cosmetic work, but we went from the process of being a sinewed stave all the way to it's a bow.
Okay, you were telling us, Ed, that you were mentioning about you're making these horn bows.
Yes, I've learned to make horn bows. It's very difficult, very time consuming, but I enjoy it, and they're always catches people's eye. If I take one to a show or something, everybody wants to look at it and touch it. Not too many people buy them because the price is prohibitive for a lot of folks. But actually, there's, to the best of my knowledge, in the whole world, there's about me and 8 more people that know how to make these. So they're not that common. The Nez Perce, various tribes they call sheep eaters and stuff up in the northern Rockies used to make them. There's no archaeological evidence of them existing prior to the advent of the horse in that country, but there's really no reason why they couldn't have made them, because the principles of sinew backing have been known for a long time. And it's thought that the sinew backing of bows probably came over with the second wave of people from Asia who crossed over the Bering Straits.
And also, you were telling us about how you actually got started with.
Yeah, as I said before, when I was a teenager, I had an uncle taught me some things about bow making, and I made a number of bows. And when I got to be a teenager, I kind of quit, and then I, went in the Navy and raised a family and all of that. And then here back in 1999, I needed an axe handle. I went down to the store, and every axe handle in there was going to break just like the one that I had broken, and I said, I haven't made an axe handle in 40 years. I'm going to make my own axe handle. And I knew I was going to be cutting a nice ash tree in the next few days, and so I cut that ash tree and saved a 3-foot long log out of it, and came home and made this axe handle. And it's lasted me from 1999 to now, and it hasn't broken. It works very well. And then it was so much fun making the axe handle, I had 2 pieces of wood left. One was big enough for another axe handle, and one of them wasn't enough wood there for an axe handle. And I looked at it and I said, I'm just going to make a bow for my 6-year-old grandson. I haven't made a bow in 40 years either. And I sat down and made a little bow for him, and it was so much fun. I took that other piece of wood and split it in 2 and made 2 bows from it. And since then I've made hundreds and hundreds of them, and managed to earn a living making bows.